1005. 1005.
Good morning. Beautiful day. Let's sing this song. It's a beautiful star of Bethlehem. Oh, beautiful star of Bethlehem, shining upon the shadows dim, giving a light for us to come and know, and guiding the wise men on their way unto the place where Jesus lay. Beautiful star of Bethlehem, shine on. Oh, beautiful star of Bethlehem, shine upon us until the glory of it. Oh, give us the light to light the way into the beautiful star of Bethlehem, shine on. Oh, beautiful star of hope progress, for the redeemed, the good, the blessed, yonder in glory when revival is won. For Jesus is now and far behind, brighter and brighter he will shine. Beautiful star of Bethlehem, shine on. Oh, beautiful star of Bethlehem, shine upon us until the glory of it. Give us the light to light the way into the land of perfect day. Oh, beautiful star of Bethlehem, shine on.
Thank you for being with us, being part of our Sunday morning Bible class. We're glad that you're here. We have a whole list of announcements since we don't have a worship bulletin today, so just bear with me while we get through all of the announcements that we have this morning. We have several deaths to announce. Sister Stella Bertram passed away. The Boonville Funeral Home will be in charge of her arrangements. Visitation is this afternoon from 5 until 8, and the funeral will be at 11 o'clock tomorrow. A.J. Horton also passed away. We need to remember him and his family. We learned this morning that Lynn Panel, his wife's name is Katie, remember the Jumptown all these families that are bereaved at this time. Golden Circle. Breakfast will not be tomorrow at Lloyd's because of the funeral for Sister Bertram, so we'll have to reschedule that. Lads to Leaders singing practice at 4 o'clock this afternoon. The Ladies Ornament Exchange will be Monday at 6 o'clock at the Elliott's house. There's a sign-up sheet to help with the progressive supper. That's out in the foyer, and also if you can help Sister Maddox on for food for the Bertram family, there's a list in the foyer for that. And also next Monday night we have our Christmas parade, and if you can help with us with fixing hot chocolate and coffee and serving cookies, that'll be over in the TAC. That's next Monday night. Boonville Christmas Parade. And I think that's all of the announcements that I'm supposed to have. Today we'll be looking at Judges chapters 19, 20, and 21. And I hope we can get through all three of these chapters. This has been a good study for me. I don't know about you, but I've learned a lot about the book of Judges through this study. After today, we'll have one more class, and we'll be looking at some of the lessons that we can learn from the book of Judges. And there are a whole lot of lessons that we can look at next week. As you read these last three chapters, you see things that are happening in your daily newspaper. It's just like he's reading things that's going on in the world today. And as you look at the three chapters, you're going to see reports of wife abuse, homosexuality, gang rape, and murder, brother killing brother, and also kidnapping. You see all of these things happening in the book of Judges, and you wonder, is this something that was going on about 2,500 years ago, or is this something that was going on today? Because we still have the same things that were going on in the book of Judges are still going on today. And it's amazing how close to reality some of the things that you see here. And it reminds us that when we don't deal with sin, it has a tendency to grow more and more. And we'll see that the sin of the city of Gibeah eventually ended up with a civil war in the land of Israel. And they ended up fighting one another. We want to look at these three chapters, and the first thing we want to look at is in chapter 19, the wickedness of a city. And the entertainment, a Levite cared more about entertainment, having a good time, than taking care of his family. And as we read through, let's look at some of the things that this Levite did. He's not named, but it reminds you of that. If you remember the Levite Jonathan from chapter 17 and 18, you know, we thought he was bad, but this Levite is even worse. And let's look at some of the things going on. Chapter 19, first 4 verses. And it came to pass in those days there was no king in Israel, but there was a certain Levite staying in the remote mountains of Ephraim. He took to himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judea. But his concubine played the harlot against him and went away from him to her father's house in Bethlehem in Judea, and was there for 4 whole months. Then her husband arose and went after her to speak kindly to her and to bring her back, having his servant and a couple of donkeys with him. So she brought him into her father's house, and when the father of the young woman saw him, he was glad to meet him. Now his father-in-law, the young woman's father, detained him, and he stayed with him 3 days. So they ate and they drank and they lodged there. Notice here that the Levite is not named, but it says that he had a concubine. A concubine is a wife, and in those days she was considered as a second-class wife. She was entitled to food and clothes and marital concessions, but any children that the concubine had would probably be considered as illegitimate, and sometimes they would be part of the inheritance. Sometimes they wouldn't. So, but now the Lord didn't approve of or say anything about concubines. They had a They were controlled by the Old Testament. And we have several of our Old Testament characters that had concubines. They were including Abraham, Jacob, Gideon, Saul, David, Solomon. So that was a practice that went on in those days. Didn't say that the Lord approved of it, but it still went on. And as you read through here, you see that this particular concubine was unfaithful to her husband. She fled to her father's house in Bethlehem. She was afraid of what her husband would do to her because of her unfaithfulness, so she fled. And as you read through here, you'll see that the Levite really missed her. And he went down to Bethlehem to bring her back, to forgive her, and to bring her back to his house. And as we read, you'll see that he and his father-in-law, they hit it off pretty well. For 3 days he was there, and they were eating and drinking and being merry. And as you read through the chapter, you'll see that on the 4th day, he did the same thing. And then when it came to the 5th day, when he was ready to go, he got up early and he was ready to go, but his father-in-law detained him. And so it was in the afternoon before he was able to get away, to start on his journey home. And the problem with that is that it was going to be dark before he got home. He didn't plan far enough in advance, because he was going to be late at night to be able to get back to his home. He had enjoyed the entertainment a little bit too much. But when he finally left, he knew that he was going to have to spend the night somewhere else. Then we want to look at the hospitality of Gibeah. Beginning in verse 10, it says, "However, the man was not willing to spend the night, so he arose and departed, and he came opposite to Jebus, that is Jerusalem. With him were the 2 saddle donkeys. His concubine was also with him. And when they were near Jebus, and the day was far spent, and the servant said to his master, 'Come, please, let us turn aside into the city of the Jebusites and lodge in it.' Then his master said to him, 'We will not turn aside into the city of foreigners who are not the children of Israel. We will go on to Gibeah.' So he said to his servant, 'Come, let us draw near to these places and spend the night in Gibeah or in Ramah.' The Levite decided he didn't want to spend the night in a city of foreigners. He didn't want to spend the night in Jerusalem. He wanted to go on to a city. Gibeah was a city of the tribe of Benjamin. And he felt better about spending the night in a place where they would be the same people. They would all be Israelites. And he didn't want to be part of a foreign country. And as we read that the Levite, he had plenty of provisions. He had food for his donkeys. He had food for he and his wife. All he needed was a place to stay. And as he came to Gibeah, he was just looking for a place. And in their culture, hospitality was one of the things that everybody practiced. You always took care of strangers as they were traveling through. And they were always looking for strangers. But when this Levite came to Gibeah, no one was there to take them in. No one was there willing to bring them in. And as we read, you'll see why. Because the children of Israel had strayed very far from God. People of Gibeah had become like the people of Sodom, a place that the Lord had condemned and destroyed. The men in Gibeah were guilty of all manner of evil. Let's look in verse 22. The Levite finally found refuge in the house of a man from Ephraim. And he brought them into his house. But notice what happens during the night. Verse 22. As they were enjoying themselves, suddenly certain men of the city, perverted men, surrounded the house and beat on the door. They spoke to the master of the house, the old man, saying, "Bring out the man who came to your house, that we may know him carnally." But the man, the master of the house, went out to them, and he said to them, No, my brethren, I beg you, do not act so wickedly. See, this man is come into my house. Do not commit this outrage. Look, here's my virgin daughter and the man's concubine. Let me bring them out now. Humble them and do to them as you please. But this man do not do such a vile thing. But the men would not heed him. So the men took his concubine and brought her out to them. And they knew her and abused her all night until the morning. When the day began to break, they let her go. Can you imagine sending your wife out to such a crowd, or sending out one of your daughters to such a crowd, knowing that they were going to be abused, knowing that these people were going to do all manner of things to them? You know, it points out to me what the attitude toward women that was abounding in this day. They were willing to send out their women to be abused. You know, I wonder sometimes how a man could send his daughter or his wife out. What would go through a man's mind to do things like that? You know, when we started our study in the book of Judges, we knew that, as it said in the very first verse of this reading, that there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in their sight. I can't imagine anyone thinking that the things that were going on here would be right. You know, the Levite was afraid of the mob, and he pacified them by sending out his concubine, where she had to endure the gang rape and all of the things that went on that night. But I wonder about the Levite himself. He was able to go into the house and sleep during the night. Not even think about his wife being abused. What did he expect for the next morning? Well, how did he think that his wife would be the next morning? Evidently, he didn't think about it too well. If you'll read in verse 27, when the master arose in the morning and he opened the doors of the house and went out to go his way, there was his concubine fallen at the door of the house with her hands on the threshold. And he said to her, "Get up and let's be going." But there was no answer. So the man lifted her onto his donkey, and the man got up and went to his place. Can you imagine the callousness of a person that didn't even try to see if she was alive or dead, that she was laying there, and he came out, the first thing he says, "Get up and let's go." And then when he found that she was dead, he He placed her on his donkey, and then they headed out, going back home, just as if nothing had happened. But you know, the story gets worse. Verse 29. When he entered his house, he took a knife and laid hold to his concubine, divided her into 12 pieces, limb by limb, and sent her throughout all of the territory of Israel. So it was that all who saw it said, no such deed has been done or seen from the day that the children of Israel came up from the land of Egypt until this day. Consider it, confer, and speak up. You know, I wonder if the Levite was just trying to cover his guilty conscience. Because it says that he took a knife and he cut her up into 12 pieces. And he sent a piece of his concubine to each of the 12 tribes of Israel. You know, he had other ways to handle the situation. He could have gone down to the tabernacle, to the high priest, and brought this situation to his attention. Yet it says that the Levite took this gruesome manner in which to file a complaint against the men of Gibeah. Cut his concubine into 12 pieces and sent her throughout the whole land, so that everyone knew of the sin of the city of Gibeah. Then when we get to chapter 20, we see that there was an assembly of people that came together because of the wickedness of the city of Gibeah. Verses 1 and 2. So all the children of Israel came out from Dan to Beersheba, as well as from the land of Gilead, and the congregation gathered together as one man before the Lord at Mizpah. And the leader of all the people, all the tribes of Israel, presented himself in the assembly of the people of God. 400,000 soldiers, foot soldiers, who drew the sword. Notice that it was a large gathering. That the announcement that was sent out, and that they came together, and they had leaders from the entire nation, and they accumulated a group of people, 400,000 foot soldiers. This was a large army that came together. And they came together to discuss what was going on in the sin of Gibeah. And they wanted to know what's going to happen. And the Levite was there, and he was able to tell them the story of what happened at Gibeah. And he was able to convince them that something needed to be done. They made a verdict here, beginning in verse 8. So all the people arose as one man. None of us will go to his tent, nor will any turn back to his house. Now this is the thing which we will do to Gibeah. We will go up against it by lot. He had enraged the children of Israel. He had gotten them stirred up. And you know, when you get people stirred up, sometimes it's hard to get them to slow down and to think about what they're doing. And they were ready. They had taken a vow that they were not even going back to their house, that they were going to take revenge. Another thing that they had vowed to do is that they would not allow any of their daughters to be married to anyone from the tribe of Benjamin. They were trying to cut them off altogether. And they had succeeded because they were ready to go. But notice verse 11. So all the men of Israel were gathered together against the city, united together as one man. They were ready to do something, to bring revenge upon the people of Gibeah because of the sin because of sin that was there. And then we have the appeal, beginning in verse 12. Then the tribe of Israel sent men throughout all the tribe of Benjamin, saying, what is this wickedness that has occurred among you? Now therefore deliver up the perverted men who were in Gibeah, that we may put them to death and remove the evil from Israel. But the children of Benjamin would not listen to the voice of the brethren of the children of Israel. Notice that they sent out messengers. They said, what's going on? We want these men of Gibeah, the wicked ones. You bring them to us and we'll take care of them. You know, they were concerned about, and you find it in this phrase here, about the evil in the land. They wanted to remove the evil from the land. Several times in the book of Deuteronomy, it's mentioned to remove the evil from the land. And they were concerned with removing that evil from the land. You know, when sin grows in the land, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And their solution was just to take it out, to remove the evil people. You know, God had used that same philosophy several times to remove the evil from the land. And this was their charge. And they offered an opportunity for the tribe of Benjamin just to deliver these evil people to them, and they would take care of it. But as you read, the tribe of Benjamin decided that they didn't want to do that. They didn't want to turn over the men that had done these wicked deeds. You know, it could have been you could have said that it was stubbornness. You could have said it was an act of patriotism because they didn't want to give up their own people. But it was a foolish act. It was an act of rebellion against God. When we rebel against God, it causes all kinds of evil. It causes all kinds of problems when we don't do what God tells us to do. And the men of Benjamin were going to cause problems. The result of their stubbornness is that war was declared brother against brother. And as you read in here, you'll see that they were greatly outnumbered. The tribe of Benjamin had 26,000 foot soldiers, plus the city of Gibeah had 700, and they were facing an army of 400,000. They had very little chance of prevailing against the rest of the tribes of Israel. And yet they continued to resist. You know, sometimes you would think that they would look at the odds, the numbers, and say, you know, maybe we need to hand these over. But they didn't. They would rather fight and have brother against brother than to admit that they were wrong. Have you ever seen folks that would never admit that they were wrong? And that's the way the tribe of Benjamin was here. They would never admit that there was evil in the land of Benjamin. Even though they knew it, they would still never admit it. And as you read through, beginning of verse 18 through verse 40 of this reading, you'll see that the children of Israel went and appeared before the high priest, and they said, who needs to go out? And they said, send Judah out first. And the war begins. It lasted 3 days. On the first day, Judah went out there to face Benjamin. And they lost 22,000 men of Israel. Benjamin was able to slaughter 22,000 men. And then on the second day, they went out again. And on the second day, they lost 18,000 men. I don't know why children of Israel, and especially the tribe of Judah, suffered such a defeat. It could have been that the Lord was trying to give them time to think about what they would do. To think about what was going on in the land. Children of Israel went back to the tabernacle. It says that they had prayer. They asked the Lord's guidance. And the Lord told them to go out again. To go out on the third day. But they had a different strategy. Verse 29, it says, the children, that then Israel set men in ambush around Gibeah. And the children of Israel went up against the children of Benjamin on the third day and put them into battle array against Gibeah as in other times. They used a different strategy on the third day. On the third day, instead of standing up to fight, they began to flee. And the army of Benjamin decided that they had them on the run again. And they followed them. But what they didn't realize was that they were walking into an ambush. And as they followed the Israelites, the children of Israel were able to go behind them and take the city of Gibeah and to start and burn it down and to kill everyone in it. And the army was caught out in the field in an ambush, and it says that the entire army, in excess of 25,000 men, died that day. And there were only 600 men left. 600 men out of the entire tribe of Benjamin were left. You know, that was a bad day for the tribe of Benjamin. Those 600 men, as you read through the account, fled to the rock of Rimmon. And they were there for a while. They were fleeing from an army that they could not defeat. And here they were. They were caught. There was nothing else they could do. They were surrounded. They didn't have a way out. They lost. Benjamin lost all of its fighting men, except for these 600 men. An entire tribe of the 12 tribes of Israel were basically wiped out. And you know, when you get to chapter 21, you'll see that the children of Israel had time to stop and to think about what they had done. About the brutality that had gone on. How they had wiped out a tribe of Israel. They were broken. And when they had time to cool off, they realized what had happened. Let's go to chapter 21. Now the men of Israel has sworn an oath at Mizpah, saying, none of us shall give his daughters to Benjamin as a wife. Then the children came to the house of God and remained there before God until evening, and they lifted up their voices and wept bitterly, and said, O Lord God of Israel, why has this come to pass in Israel, that the day there should be one tribe missing in Israel? They began to think about what they had done. That they had basically wiped out that tribe, and there was only 600 men left. That was the entire tribe of Benjamin that was left. 600 men. And they had made a vow that they were not going to give their daughters to the Benjamites. So what was going to happen? How were they going to be able to rebuild that tribe? You know, instead of asking God, what should we do? They came up with their own solutions. They didn't get directions from the Lord. They depended on their own wisdom. And as we see, they decided how to handle this situation. Beginning in verse 9 of chapter 21. For when the people were counted, indeed, not one of the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead was there. So the congregation sent out there 12,000 men of the most valiant men, and commanded them, saying, Go and strike the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead with the edge of the sword, including the women and children. And this is the thing that you shall do. You shall utterly destroy every male, every woman who has known a man intimately. So they found among the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead 400 young virgins who had not known a man intimately. And they brought them to the camp at Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan. They came up with a solution. These folks in Jabesh Gilead, they didn't send anybody to help in this fight. They didn't do anything to help us. So why don't we just go over there and just destroy them, punish them? And by the way, if there are any young virgins there, you bring them back, and they'll be wise to the men of Benjamin. Can you imagine a solution like that? Let's just kill some more of our own people so that these folks can have wives. Problem was, they didn't get enough. They only got 400. They needed 600. You know, so they still had a problem. Then the elders of Israel had another meeting. Verse 19. Then they said, in fact, there's a yearly feast of the Lord in Shiloh, which is north of Bethel, on the east side of the highway that goes up from Bethel to Shechem. Therefore they instructed the children of Benjamin, saying, Go lie and wait in the vineyards and watch. And when the daughters of Shiloh come out to perform their dances, then come out from the vineyards, and every man catch a wife for himself from the daughters of Shiloh. Then go to the land of Benjamin. The first solution is, let's just kill a whole bunch of other folks. Let's take revenge on them because they didn't send anybody to fight. The second solution for the other 200 wives is, let's do some kidnapping. You just lie and wait there at Shiloh, and when these young ladies come dancing by, as they did yearly, you go out and you just kidnap you a wife. Can you imagine how that this nation, the people of God, how far they had turned away from God? You know, it's the expression of how the home goes, so the nation goes. From the very beginning of these last 5 chapters, we see that the home had fallen apart. We see that the nation of Israel was falling apart. Why was it falling apart so bad? It was falling apart because they no longer listened to what God told them to do. God had instructed them, given them the first 5 books of the Old Testament, the law. They had God's law, and yet they chose not to obey God's law. In our world today, we have God's law. We have His commandments. We know what's right and what's wrong. And yet sometimes we don't want to follow what God says. The book of Judges tells us what's going to happen to God's people when it begins to turn away from God's commandments. When sin is allowed to grow and to prosper in the local congregation, you can see the problems that it's going to bring. These people, in these last 3 chapters, they were depending on the fact that God had not caused them to hurt. And yet we see how far away from God they had become. The last verse in the last chapter of Judges. In those days there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. That's repeated over and over in the book of Judges. And when we get to the point that we decide that we want to do what we want to do and not what God wants to do, we can see the destruction that comes to God's people when we don't follow His commands. Our time is about up, and next week we will do a review of the book of Judges, and we'll talk about at least 10 lessons that we can take from the book of Judges. Thank you for being here.